The ICU hallway stayed awake long after midnight. Machines breathed for Elizabeth Jackson, while the space beside her bed remained empty. Her chart waited for a signature that never came. Her husband had already left the hospital. Not because the danger had passed, but because there was a party. Miles away, beneath music and laughter, he raised a glass and joked about freedom, calling her fragile, inconvenient. Nurses recorded the unanswered calls. Time stamped the silence. What he didn't know was this: while he celebrated, someone else was entering the hospital, someone with the authority to change everything. And when that man reached her bedside, he would speak 4 words that could not be taken back. Stay with this story. It isn't loud, and it isn't rushed, but it tells the truth. Comment where you're watching from and the local time where you are right now. And if you believe quiet strength deserves to be seen, consider subscribing. The night Elizabeth Jackson was admitted to the ICU did not announce itself with chaos. There were no shouts, no dramatic rush through swinging doors. It arrived quietly, carried in on wheels, wrapped in sterile sheets and measured voices. She was 32 years old, black, small-framed, composed, even when unconscious, as if her body still remembered how to hold itself together. A nurse clipped a plastic band around her wrist. Another read her vitals out loud, steady and precise. The monitors picked up the rhythm her body could no longer maintain on its own. Oxygen flowed. IV lines were secured. A doctor dictated notes into a recorder, already moving on to the next decision. Outside the glass wall, her name appeared on the digital board: Elizabeth Jackson, ICU, critical. Underneath it, a blinking prompt waited for confirmation of consent. In the United States, hospitals ran on procedures before they ran on sympathy. Forms mattered. Signatures mattered. And when a patient could not speak for herself, the system turned to the person legally designated to do it for her. Her husband, Ryan Jackson's name was already on file, entered months earlier during a routine visit typed quickly into a tablet without much thought. Spouse, the field read. Primary emergency contact. The nurse dialed the number. It rang until a voicemail. She tried again, and again. On the 4th attempt, she left a message. Calm, professional, recorded. This is the ICU at St. Mary's Medical Center. Your wife has been admitted in critical condition. We need your authorization to proceed with further treatment. Please call us immediately. The timestamp logged itself automatically. 11:47 p.m. No one panicked yet. People in medicine learned patience the hard way. Phones died. Meetings ran long. Sometimes spouses froze when fear became real. The staff moved forward under emergency protocol, stabilizing Elizabeth while waiting for the legal green light to do more. Inside the room, Elizabeth lay still. Her hair pulled back loosely, her face pale under the harsh white lights. She looked younger like this, quieter, as if the world had finally stopped demanding explanations from her. If she could have spoken, she would have said nothing. Elizabeth Jackson was not a woman who filled silence with noise. She observed, she listened, and when she had something worth preserving, she wrote it down. That habit had followed her into marriage. Her apartment, before it became their apartment, had always been neat, almost sparse. Drawers organized, receipts filed, old notebooks stacked carefully in a box labeled by year. It was not paranoia. It was training. Years earlier, she had worked administrative roles, where missing documentation meant blame traveled downward, never up. Ryan used to joke about it. "You keep records like you're preparing for a trial," he once laughed, flipping through one of her notebooks. Elizabeth had smiled, small and non-committal, and taken it back from him without comment. Now, as her body fought quietly against failure, the same instinct lived on in the systems around her. Machines logged heart rate, computers recorded calls. Every unanswered ring became data. At 12:06 a.m., the ICU nurse tried Ryan's number again. Straight to voicemail. At 12:09 a.m., an automated email was generated and sent to the address on file. Urgent authorization required. ICU admission. It was marked red 12 minutes later. No response followed. In another part of the city, Ryan Jackson stood under warm amber lights, his phone face down on a high-top table. Music pulsed through the room. Glasses clinked. Someone slapped him on the back and asked for another round. He didn't look at the screen when it lit up. Back in the hospital, a resident reviewed Elizabeth's chart and frowned. "We need consent to move forward with the next step," she said quietly to the attending physician. "She's stable for now, but not improving." The attending nodded. "Call again. Document everything." By 12:34 a.m., 3 voicemail messages had been left. 2 emails sent. A text message triggered by the hospital's automated system joined the queue. Still nothing. Elizabeth's breathing hitched once briefly before settling again. A nurse adjusted the oxygen flow and smoothed the blanket over her legs. For a moment, the nurse paused, looking at her face. "She came in alone?" she asked. No, another nurse replied. Her husband brought her. He left. That answer carried no judgment. It didn't need to. In hospitals, absence spoke for itself. At 12:51 a.m., hospital administration was notified. When a patient remained critical and the legal proxy could not be reached, policy required escalation, not to drama, but to safeguards. A note was added to Elizabeth's file. Primary contact unreachable. Secondary contact listed. The name attached to that secondary contact had been entered years earlier during paperwork Elizabeth completed on her own. It was not discussed at home. It had never been updated after marriage. The nurse hesitated before dialing it. "Should we wait a little longer?" she asked. The attending shook his head. "No, we wait on patients, not on people who don't answer." The call went through on the first ring. William Carter speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, deep, alert in a way that suggested he had not been asleep. "This is St. Mary's Medical Center," the nurse said. "We're calling regarding Elizabeth Jackson. She's been admitted to the ICU." There was a pause. Not confusion, not delay. "I'm on my way," the man said. "Send me the documentation. I'll have counsel contact you as well." The line went dead before the nurse could say anything else. Inside the ICU, Elizabeth stirred slightly, her fingers twitching against the sheets. Her eyes did not open. She did not know what had just been set in motion. All she knew, if some quiet part of her still knew anything at all, was that she was no longer alone, in the way that mattered most. The machines continued their work. The hallway lights stayed on. The hospital moved forward not because of urgency or anger, but because procedure demanded it. And somewhere between the unanswered calls and the recorded timestamps, the night began to change direction. The party did not know Elizabeth Jackson existed. It unfolded inside a rooftop lounge overlooking the city glass walls, dim lighting the kind of place where conversations were loud enough to sound important and vague enough to mean nothing. Music pulsed steadily engineered to keep people standing, drinking, spending. Someone had chosen it because it felt like success. Ryan Jackson fit easily into the room. He stood near the bar with a short glass in his hand jacket, slung casually over the back of a chair. His phone lay face down on the table beside him, vibrating occasionally, lighting the surface with brief flashes he did not acknowledge. Each time it buzzed, someone was talking and laughing, clinking glasses. Each time, he chose not to interrupt the moment. "You made it," one of his colleagues said, leaning in close. "Thought you'd be stuck at the hospital all night." Ryan smiled. "She's stable," he said too quickly. "Doctors always exaggerate." The statement floated between them unchallenged. No one asked what stable meant. No one asked why he was here instead of there. The room accepted confidence as proof. Another round arrived. Ryan raised his glass. "To good news," he said. And finally, catching a break, laughter followed. Someone clapped. Someone else filmed a quick clip for their story, catching the moment Ryan smiled into the camera, relaxed, unburdened. The timestamp embedded itself quietly in the corner of the frame. Back at St. Mary's Medical Center, Elizabeth's heart rate spiked briefly before settling again. A nurse noted it. The system recorded it. A doctor adjusted medication and waited for authorization that still hadn't come. At 1:07 a.m., the hospital's automated system sent another alert to Ryan's phone. This one was marked urgent. It appeared between a missed call and a text message. Ryan's phone vibrated longer this time. He noticed. He turned it face down again. "Everything okay?" someone asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." He took a sip, then another. The alcohol softened the edges of the night-blurred responsibility into something that could be postponed. Someone brought up Elizabeth. "How's your wife handling everything?" a woman asked, not unkindly. "You mentioned she's been stressed." Ryan exhaled as if burdened. "She's a lot," he said. "Always has been. Turns everything into a crisis." A few nods, sympathetic murmurs, the familiar rhythm of social absolution. "She's strong," he added, as if that settled it. "She'll bounce back." No one pointed out the contradiction. Strength in rooms like this was often used to excuse neglect. At 1:18 a.m., a nurse left a second voicemail. At 1:21 a.m., an email reminder followed. At 1:24 a.m., Elizabeth's oxygen saturation dipped again. In the lounge, Ryan leaned closer to a friend, lowering his voice. "Honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm carrying everything he said. Work, bills, decisions. It gets exhausting." The words sounded practiced. They landed easily. The friend nodded. "You deserve a night off." Ryan smiled, relief spreading across his face. He did not mention the ICU. He did not mention consent forms. He did not mention the quiet room with the machines breathing for his wife. What he didn't know, and could not have known from this distance, was that every absence created shape. Every ignored call formed a line, and lines when drawn carefully became timelines. At 1:33 a.m., hospital administration opened Elizabeth's file for review. The digital system displayed a list of outreach attempts, each stamped precisely. The attending physician scrolled through them slowly. "She's critical," he said. "We can't keep waiting." "Has the spouse responded at all?" an administrator asked. "No," the nurse replied. But he opened one of the emails. The room went quiet for a moment. "That's documented?" the administrator asked. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Proceed." In the lounge, Ryan laughed loudly at something someone said. A second video clip caught it. Another timestamp joined the first. He leaned back, loosening his tie. The night felt lighter now, less complicated. The hospital existed somewhere else, far away, abstract contained. At 1:46 a.m., Elizabeth's chart updated automatically. Her condition was flagged for escalation. A small red symbol appeared beside her name. A nurse stood at the station watching the board. "He still hasn't called," she said. The attending nodded. "Then we move forward." Across town, Ryan checked his watch. "I'm going to grab some air," he said, stepping toward the balcony. He pulled out his phone finally and glanced at the screen. Missed calls, notifications. An email marked urgent. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. He slid the phone back into his pocket without opening anything. The city stretched out below him, glowing indifferent. He breathed it in, unaware that the same night was being measured elsewhere in seconds and data points. At 2:02 a.m., the hospital's legal counsel was notified. At 2:04 a.m., the secondary contact's attorney confirmed receipt of documents. At 2:06 a.m., preparations began quietly, efficiently. Elizabeth lay still, unaware of parties or laughter or excuses. Her body responded to care without opinion. Machines continued their work, indifferent to who showed up and who did not. What mattered now was that the record was complete. When Ryan finally returned to the table, someone raised a glass again. "To surviving the chaos," they said. Ryan clinked his glass without hesitation. He did not see the irony. He could not hear the quiet closing in, because while he was choosing the comfort of noise, the truth was assembling itself patiently, line by line, timestamp by timestamp. And it would not need him to speak when the time came. Elizabeth Jackson learned early that silence could be misread. People often mistook it for weakness, for compliance, for a lack of opinion. In rooms where decisions were made loudly, her quiet presence blended into the background, easily overlooked. She had learned not to correct that misunderstanding. Silence, she knew, had a way of collecting details others missed. Long before the ICU, long before the night, her name blinked red on a hospital board. Elizabeth had built a system for herself. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. She grew up watching adults rewrite history with confidence. A missed promise became a misunderstanding. A raised voice became concern. An absence became, "I was busy." Elizabeth learned that memory alone was fragile. Paper was not. Her notebooks were unremarkable at first glance. No dramatic entries, no emotional outbursts. Just dates, times, brief descriptions, written in careful handwriting. March 14th. Ryan said he'd be home by 7. Arrived after midnight. No call. June 2nd. Joint account short $430. He said it was an error. September 19th. Doctor's appointment. Ryan left early. Said work emergency. Each line stood alone, factual, unadorned. She never imagined anyone else would read them. They were not weapons. They were anchors, proof that she had not imagined patterns that others insisted were coincidence. Ryan disliked the notebooks. "They make you look suspicious," he once said, flipping through one with a frown. "Like you don't trust anyone." Elizabeth had closed it gently and put it away. "I trust myself," she replied. He laughed as if it were a joke. In public, Ryan spoke for both of them. He was louder, more confident. People listened. Elizabeth stood beside him, nodding when appropriate, smiling when required. It was easier that way, less exhausting. At home, she learned to observe, to notice which explanations changed depending on the audience, to see how apologies appeared only after consequences. None of it felt urgent. Not at first. Then came the hospital visits, routine at first checkups, tests, follow-ups, that turned into longer conversations with doctors. Elizabeth learned how systems worked, how charts were updated, how billing codes translated into decisions, how delays accumulated quietly until they mattered. She noticed that paperwork told a clearer story than people ever did. So when she filled out her medical forms alone, sitting in a waiting room years earlier, she was careful. She listed Ryan as her primary contact because that was expected. But when the form asked for a secondary contact, she paused. Her pen hovered. She wrote a name she did not say out loud at home. William H. Carter. The relationship between them had never been simple, never public. It was governed by sealed records and careful distance by legal agreements designed to protect rather than connect. He did not attend holidays. He did not call weekly. But he was present in ways that mattered. He funded her education anonymously. He ensured she had health insurance during gaps she never explained to anyone else. He respected her boundaries even when they hurt him. Most importantly, he answered the phone. Elizabeth knew that without sentimentality, without illusion. That knowledge settled into her body now, even as she lay unconscious, as if some part of her understood that systems were aligning the way they always did, slowly, deliberately. In the ICU, a nurse adjusted her IV and checked the chart again. No word from the husband, she asked quietly. The attending shook his head. Nothing. The nurse glanced at the secondary contact information. The name meant nothing to her yet. He answered immediately, the nurse said. The attending nodded once. That tells us enough for now. At 2:18 a.m., hospital administration documented the escalation. Policies were followed carefully. Every step required justification. Every decision left a trace. Elizabeth's silence, physical and forced by circumstance, was being counterbalanced by the clarity of her records. In another part of the hospital, a plaque hung on the wall near the elevators. It listed major donors etched in polished metal. Visitors passed it without thought. One name stood out to staff who paid attention. Carter Global Holdings. The ICU itself occupied a wing renovated years earlier, equipped with advanced monitoring systems, cutting-edge equipment, private rooms designed to reduce infection risk. Few patients knew who funded such improvements. fewer still understood how those connections quietly influenced response times, resource allocation, and administrative urgency. Elizabeth had never mentioned it. She had never leveraged it. She had simply written the name down when asked who should be called if everything else failed. At 2:31 a.m., a hospital administrator reviewed the case summary. "Everything is documented?" she asked. "Yes," the nurse replied. "Calls, emails, read receipts, timestamps." "Good," the administrator said. "We proceed cleanly." Clean was important. Clean meant defensible. Clean meant no room for interpretation later. Elizabeth's heart rate stabilized slightly. Her breathing eased with adjustment. The machines responded predictably professionally. The room remained quiet, except for the steady sounds of life being maintained. If Elizabeth could have opened her eyes, she would have seen nothing remarkable. No dramatic entrances, no raised voices, just people doing their jobs correctly. That was how justice often began, not with confrontation, but with compliance. At 2:44 a.m., Ryan's phone buzzed again at the lounge. He felt it this time, a faint irritation breaking through the haze of alcohol and laughter. He glanced at the screen, noticed the number of missed notifications had grown. He frowned. "Everything okay?" someone asked. "Yeah," he said automatically. "Just my wife's doctors being dramatic." The word landed heavier than he realized. Back at the hospital, Elizabeth's chart reflected a different story. Objective, unemotional, complete. Her silence was no longer empty. It had become a structure supported by timestamps, reinforced by policy ready to hold weight when the moment came. And while Ryan continued to believe that absence could be explained away later, the system Elizabeth trusted was already moving past explanations. It was moving toward conclusions. By the time the clock reached 3:00 a.m., the ICU had settled into its night rhythm, the kind that felt calm, only because every movement was controlled. Elizabeth Jackson remained unconscious, her condition neither improving nor worsening enough to offer relief. The attending physician stood at the foot of her bed, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the monitor, as if willing it to change its mind. "We're running out of room to wait," he said quietly. The nurse beside him nodded. "We've documented everything." That sentence carried weight. In medicine, documentation was not just a formality. It was protection. It was memory. It was the difference between care and liability. Elizabeth needed a procedure, not an experimental one, not a desperate gamble. A standard intervention that required consent from a legal decision-maker. Her husband had not responded. The attending turned toward the glass wall and motioned for the hospital administrator to step closer. "What's our standing if we proceed without him?" The administrator, Margaret Lewis, did not answer immediately. She had been with the hospital long enough to know that the wrong word spoken too quickly could undo hours of careful compliance. "We can proceed under emergency exception," she said finally, "but only to a point. Anything beyond stabilization requires proxy authority." "And the spouse?" the attending asked. "Unreachable," she replied, despite confirmed receipt of communication. She handed him a tablet displaying the outreach log. Times, methods, read receipts, each entry clean, indisputable. The attending exhaled slowly. "Then we escalate." Margaret nodded once. She had already anticipated this moment. Hospital policy required legal review when a designated proxy failed to respond during a critical window. Not because the institution distrusted families, but because the law demanded clarity. Silence had limits. Margaret stepped away and made a call from her office. "Daniel," she said when the line connected, "we're activating secondary proxy review." On the other end, a man listened without interruption. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He understood process. "I'll coordinate with their counsel," he said. "Send me the file." Within minutes, documents were transmitted securely. Elizabeth's chart, the outreach logs, her medical history, and the form she had completed years earlier, quietly, carefully listing a secondary contact. Margaret stared at the name again. William H. Carter. She had seen it before, of course, in board meetings, in donor correspondence, in contracts signed with confidence that did not require flourish. She had not expected to see it here. At 3:12 a.m., the nurse approached Elizabeth's bed and adjusted the monitor leads. Her movements were gentle, practiced. "Elizabeth," she said softly, knowing the words were more habit than hope. "You're doing okay. We're taking care of things." Elizabeth did not stir. Outside the room, the attending physician met with Margaret and the on-call legal counsel. They spoke in low voices, measured and precise. "The secondary contact has accepted responsibility," Margaret said. "He's en route." The attending raised an eyebrow. "And the husband still unreachable." There was no satisfaction in the statement, only consequence. In another part of the hospital, security was notified quietly, not because anyone expected a disturbance, but because policy required preparation when high-profile individuals became involved. The hospital did not advertise discretion. It practiced it. At 3:25 a.m., Ryan Jackson's phone buzzed again. This time, he glanced at it longer. His screen was crowded with notifications, now missed calls, emails, messages marked urgent. He felt a flicker of irritation sharpen into something else. Annoyance turned to unease. He stepped away from the table and swiped open one of the emails. His eyes skimmed quickly. "ICU, immediate authorization required." He scoffed quietly. "Always like this," he muttered. "Worst timing." He typed a brief response and deleted it before sending. Then he put the phone back into his pocket and returned to the group. "I'm heading out soon," he said, forcing a smile. Early morning. No one questioned him. No one needed to. Back at St. Mary's, Elizabeth's condition shifted again. Subtle, enough to matter. The attending made a decision. "Prepare to proceed under emergency protocol," he said. "We'll pause where we need consent beyond that." The nurse nodded. Understood. Everything moved efficiently. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Just professionals adjusting to reality. At 3:41 a.m., the elevator doors on the administrative floor opened. William Carter stepped out. He was dressed simply dark coat, no tie, his posture straight without rigidity. He did not announce himself. He did not need to. Margaret met him halfway down the corridor. "Mr. Carter," she said, "thank you for coming so quickly." He nodded once. "How is she? Stable?" Margaret replied, critical but holding. "That's enough," he said. "Show me the paperwork." They walked together toward a conference room, passing staff, who glanced up briefly and then looked away, instinctively sensing the gravity of the moment. Inside the room, documents were laid out neatly. Consent forms, proxy confirmations, legal acknowledgments. William reviewed each page carefully. He did not rush. He did not skim. "This is correct," he said, signing where indicated. "Proceed." Margaret watched him for a moment after he finished. "You're listed as secondary contact," she said. "We've activated that authority." He met her gaze evenly. As intended. There was no need to explain further. At 3:58 a.m., authorization was logged into the system. The attending physician received the update on his tablet. "Consent confirmed," he said. "We can move forward." The procedure began shortly after. Quietly, precisely, Elizabeth's body responded as it had been waiting for permission. At 4:12 a.m., Ryan Jackson finally left the party. He checked his phone as he walked toward the elevator, the glow illuminating his face. He opened the hospital email, fully this time, scrolling through the earlier messages he had ignored. His expression tightened. By the time he reached the street, another notification appeared. Secondary proxy activated. Ryan stopped walking, what he muttered aloud. He dialed the hospital immediately. At the ICU desk, the nurse answered calmly. "St. Mary's Medical Center." "This is Ryan Jackson," he said quickly. "My wife Elizabeth, I'm calling about her condition." "Yes, Mr. Jackson," the nurse replied. "Your call has been noted." "Why am I seeing messages about proxy changes?" he demanded. There was a pause. Not hesitation, precision. "Sir," the nurse said, "due to multiple unsuccessful attempts to reach you during a critical period, the hospital followed standard protocol." Ryan opened his mouth to protest. "Her secondary contact has assumed responsibility," the nurse continued. "You may speak with administration for further details." The line went quiet. At the other end of the hospital, William Carter stood outside the ICU room, watching through the glass as the staff worked around Elizabeth. He did not touch the door. He did not interrupt. He simply stood there, present, accountable, exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time that night, Elizabeth Jackson was no longer waiting on someone who might choose not to answer. The ICU doors did not open with ceremony. They slid apart soundlessly, revealing a room defined by order machines, aligned lights. Calibrated voices kept low by instinct rather than instruction. The staff moved with practiced coordination, each aware of the others, each step part of a system that tolerated no confusion. William Carter stopped just outside the threshold. He did not rush to the bedside. He did not speak at first. He took in the scene the way he approached everything else, by understanding the structure before intervening in it. Elizabeth lay still beneath a thin hospital blanket, her chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. Her face was drawn but composed even now. The lines of strain softened by sleep or something like it. A nurse noticed William standing there and approached quietly. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you can come in." He nodded once and stepped inside. The attending physician joined them, tablet in hand. "We've proceeded under emergency protocol," he said. "Now that consent is confirmed, we can continue with the full intervention." "Do it," William replied. His voice was steady, unadorned. "Keep me informed." The physician hesitated only long enough to confirm the authority in front of him. "Yes, sir." Outside the room, Margaret Lewis spoke with hospital security in low tones. There was no need for alarms or restrictions yet, but protocol required awareness. High-profile involvement altered risk calculations. It always did. William remained at the foot of the bed, hands folded loosely in front of him. He did not reach out. He had learned long ago that presence did not require touch to be felt. Elizabeth shifted slightly, a small movement barely perceptible. The machine adjusted automatically, responding to her body's attempt to take control back piece by piece. William watched carefully. He had imagined this moment many times, though never like this. In his mind, their reunions were quiet conversations. In neutral spaces, offices, conference rooms, places governed by agreements and distance. He had never imagined her unconscious, suspended between decisions she could not make for herself. The fault, he knew, was not hers. A nurse approached again. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we need to update the visitor list. Who is authorized?" William looked at the screen she held out to him. Names could be added. Names could be limited. The power was procedural but absolute. "Only me," he said, "for now." She nodded and entered it into the system. At 4:37 a.m. Ryan Jackson arrived at the hospital. He moved quickly through the automatic doors, his earlier confidence replaced by sharp urgency. His jacket was wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked like someone who had left in control and returned to find the locks changed. "I need to see my wife," he said at the front desk. The receptionist glanced at her screen. "Name Ryan Jackson." She typed, paused, then looked up. "Please wait." Ryan's jaw tightened. "What's going on? I'm her husband." "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "Administration will speak with you." He waited, tapping his foot against the polished floor, eyes flicking toward the elevators that led to the ICU. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the notifications he had dismissed earlier. Each one now felt accusatory. A security officer approached, posture calm but deliberate. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "this way, please." They led him not to the ICU, but to a small consultation room off the main corridor. Margaret Lewis entered a moment later, closing the door behind her. "Mr. Jackson," she said, sitting across from him. "Thank you for coming in." "What's happening?" Ryan demanded. "Why am I being blocked from seeing my wife?" Margaret folded her hands on the table. "During a critical period, we were unable to reach you despite multiple documented attempts. Under hospital policy, we activated the secondary proxy listed in Elizabeth Jackson's file." Ryan stared at her. "Secondary proxy, yes." "And who is that?" he asked, though some instinct had already begun to answer the question for him. Margaret met his eyes. William H. Carter. The name landed heavily in the small room. Ryan laughed once sharply. "That's not possible," he said. The authority is valid." Margaret continued, her tone unchanged. "Documentation has been verified. Consent has been granted. Medical care is proceeding." Ryan stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I'm her husband. You can't just—" "We didn't," Margaret interrupted gently. "You did not respond." Silence stretched between them. "I was busy," Ryan said finally. "I didn't think Margaret did not react." "The record reflects the facts," she said. "Nothing more." She slid a printed summary across the table. Times, calls, emails, read receipts. The story told itself without commentary. Ryan scanned it quickly, his face flushing. "I need to see her," he said again, quieter this time. At this moment, Margaret replied, "Visitation is restricted to authorized individuals." "And that's him?" Ryan asked. "Carter, yes." Ryan's hands curled into fists. "Who is he to her?" Margaret paused, not out of uncertainty, but discretion. "That question is not mine to answer." In the ICU, William stood closer to Elizabeth now, watching as the staff completed the procedure. The room remained calm. No alarms, no urgency, just progress. Elizabeth's breathing steadied. Her vitals shifted incrementally toward stability. The attending physician glanced at William. "She's responding well," he said. "We'll know more in the next few hours." "Thank you," William replied. The physician hesitated, then added, "Her husband is here." William's expression did not change. "I assumed he would be," he said. "Do you want—" "Not yet," William said simply. The decision was not punitive. It was protective. Elizabeth did not need confusion when she woke. She did not need voices competing for authority. She needed space, order, control. At 5:12 a.m., the sky outside the ICU windows began to lighten. Morning edged its way into the hospital, indifferent to the night it was replacing. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered briefly, then closed again. William leaned forward slightly. "You're not alone," he said quietly, though he did not know if she could hear him. "You haven't been for a long time." Down the hall, Ryan paced the consultation room. Phone pressed to his ear as he left voicemail after voicemail for attorneys, for friends, for anyone who might explain how this had happened without him noticing. Each call ended the same way. No immediate answers. At 5:28 a.m., hospital administration finalized the temporary visitation and decision-making orders. They were precise, time-bound, reviewable. Nothing about the process was dramatic. That was its strength. William signed one final document and handed the pen back to Margaret. "I'll remain on site," he said. "Notify me of any changes." "Of course," she replied. As she left, William returned to his place by Elizabeth's bedside. Outside, the hospital shifted into day mode. Shift changes occurred. Charts were handed off. The night's events condensed into clean summaries for the next team. Elizabeth Jackson lay at the center of it, all still silent, still composed, now surrounded by a structure that did not require her to speak to protect her interests. And for the first time since she had been wheeled through the ICU doors, the person standing guard over her had never needed an excuse to stay. Ryan Jackson did not sit well with uncertainty. He paced the narrow consultation room, the air stale with recycled conditioning and unfinished explanations. The chair across from him remained empty now that Margaret Lewis had left the door closed, with a finality that felt intentional. Every few steps, he checked his phone again, scrolling as if the screen might suddenly offer absolution. It didn't. Messages he had ignored earlier now read like accusations. Missed calls, urgent emails. The phrase "secondary proxy activated" glowed in his mind, refusing to settle into anything that made sense to him. He dialed again, this time his mother. "Mom," he said the moment the line connected. "I need you to come to the hospital." "What happened?" Linda Jackson asked, alarmed. "Elizabeth," he replied. "There's a problem. They're not letting me see her." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. What do you mean they're not letting you see your own wife? They said Ryan stopped himself, irritation flaring. They said some donor has control now. Some man named Carter. Silence on the other end stretched longer than he expected. Mom, he pressed. I'm on my way, Linda said finally. Don't say anything else. I'll handle it. Ryan ended the call and exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. Control. That was what this felt like. Slipping away, not Elizabeth, not the marriage, but control over the narrative he had always assumed belonged to him. Down the hall, beyond locked doors and restricted access signs, Elizabeth Jackson lay unmoving, her body wrapped in a careful choreography of care. Nurses rotated quietly. The attending physician reviewed updated vitals and nodded satisfied. She's stable, he said to William Carter. Still critical, but stable. William acknowledged the update with a nod of his own. He had taken a seat now close enough to see Elizabeth's face, clearly far enough to avoid interfering. His phone rested untouched in his hand, its screen dark. He did not look at the door when it opened briefly. A nurse stepped in. Mr. Carter, she said softly. Administration wanted to let you know Mr. Jackson has arrived. William's gaze remained on Elizabeth. I know, he said. Do you want... Not yet, he repeated. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. She understood boundaries. She understood timing. Elizabeth shifted again, a small movement, but this time her brow furrowed slightly, as if she were surfacing from a place where sound and sensation were beginning to register. William leaned forward just enough to notice. Easy, he murmured, not touching her. You're safe. In the consultation room, Ryan's agitation grew louder with each passing minute. He stood when the door opened again, expecting Margaret. Instead, a hospital administrator he didn't recognize stepped inside. Mr. Jackson, the man said, your mother is here. Relief surged through Ryan. Good, he said. Finally. Linda Jackson entered with purpose, her posture stiff, her handbag clutched like armor. She took one look at Ryan's face and clicked her tongue. I knew something like this would happen, she said. I told you not to leave. Ryan bristled. I didn't think. You never do. Linda snapped, then turned toward the administrator. I want to see my daughter-in-law. The administrator kept his voice level. Visitation is restricted at this time. That's ridiculous, Linda said sharply. She's family. Mrs. Jackson, the administrator, replied. Access is determined by medical proxy. And her husband is standing right here, Linda said, gesturing at Ryan. That should be enough. It isn't, the administrator said. Ryan's patience snapped. This is insane, he said. She's my wife. I'm the one who should be making decisions. The administrator looked at him calmly. Sir, the record reflects that you were unreachable during a critical window. Ryan scoffed. For a few hours, for several documented attempts, the administrator corrected, including confirmation that messages were received. Linda's eyes flicked to Ryan. Is that true, she asked. Ryan hesitated. I didn't think it was that serious. The administrator slid a folder across the table. This is the timeline, he said. You're welcome to review it. Linda opened the folder, scanning quickly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. They activated a secondary proxy, the administrator continued. That proxy has full authority at present. And who exactly is this person, Linda demanded. The administrator chose his words carefully. William H. Carter. Linda froze. The name did not mean nothing to her. It could not. Anyone who read newspapers, who watched the markets, who understood power, recognized it immediately. That can't be right, she said, her voice suddenly lower. What connection does he have to Elizabeth? That's not information I'm authorized to disclose, the administrator replied. Ryan stared between them, confusion tightening into something darker. This doesn't make sense, he said. Elizabeth never mentioned him. Some things aren't mentioned, Linda muttered. Ryan turned on her. What does that mean? It means, Linda said sharply, that you never paid attention. The room went quiet. Down the corridor, William stood as the attending physician finished his assessment. She may regain consciousness soon, the doctor said. We'll monitor closely. Thank you, William replied. The doctor hesitated. Her husband is requesting access. William met his gaze. When she's awake, he said, she decides. That was the line he would not cross. At 6:03 a.m., Elizabeth's eyes opened. Not fully, not with clarity, just enough to register light shadow presence. Her gaze drifted unfocused across the room before settling briefly on William. She did not recognize him, not consciously, but something in her expression softened tension easing from her brow. Elizabeth, the nurse, said gently, "You're in the ICU. You're safe." Elizabeth's lips parted slightly. No sound came out. William leaned closer. "Careful now. You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "Just rest." Her eyes flicked toward him again. She blinked once slowly. In that small gesture, he saw recognition not of him, but of safety. Outside the ICU, Ryan argued with administration, his voice rising, his frustration spilling into demands and accusations. None of it changed the rules. None of it altered the fact that the authority he assumed was his had been transferred not through malice, but through absence. Elizabeth closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her back under. William straightened, stepping back into his role as guardian rather than presence. "She's awake," the nurse said softly. "Yes," he replied, "and she'll wake again." Ryan never saw that moment. He would learn about it later, secondhand, filtered through reports and procedures stripped of emotion the way facts often were. For now, all he could feel was the weight of doors that would not open, and a story that was no longer his to control. And as the hospital morning settled into routine, one truth became unavoidable. Elizabeth Jackson was no longer waiting for him to show up. By mid-morning, the hospital had fully shifted into its daytime rhythm. White coats replaced night scrubs. Clipboards changed hands. The ICU remained quiet, insulated from the noise of the building waking up around it. Elizabeth Jackson slept again, deeper this time. The procedure had taken hold. Her vitals were steadier now, the numbers on the monitor less erratic, less alarming. The nurse charted the changes carefully, each improvement logged with the same precision as every earlier concern. William Carter stepped out of the ICU room just as Daniel Moore arrived. Daniel was not dressed for drama. No sharp suit, no polished speech. He carried a slim leather folder and the calm posture of someone who trusted process more than performance. He shook William's hand once firmly, then glanced toward the ICU doors. "How is she?" Daniel asked. "Stable," William replied. "For now." Daniel nodded. "That's enough to start." They walked together to a small conference room near the administrative wing. The space was neutral glass table, plain chairs, a screen mounted on the wall. It was the kind of room designed to host difficult conversations without absorbing their weight. Daniel placed the folder on the table and opened it. "We're not here to escalate," he said. "We're here to document." William sat folding his hands. "Then begin." Daniel tapped a button on his tablet and the screen came to life. The first slide displayed a simple timeline. No commentary, no interpretation, just facts. 11:47 p.m. ICU admission. 11:48 p.m. first call placed to primary contact. No answer. 11:52 p.m. second call. Voicemail. 12:06 a.m. automated email sent. 12:18 a.m. email opened. 12:34 a.m. third call. No response. 12:51 a.m. administration notified. Daniel let the silence sit. "This is clean," he said. "No gaps, no assumptions." William watched without expression. He did not need persuasion. Daniel swiped to the next slide. Bank records appeared. Joint account activity, Daniel explained. Time-stamped transactions. Charges scrolled down the screen. High-end lounge tab, rideshare fare, bottle service, late-night food delivery. All during the same window, Daniel said, while the hospital was attempting to reach him. William exhaled slowly through his nose. "Proceed." The next slide showed two still images taken from video clips. Ryan's face, mid-laugh. A raised glass. The background, unmistakably celebratory. Publicly posted stories, Daniel said. Original uploads archived. Metadata preserved. Was he aware he was being recorded? William asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. He looked directly at the camera. William nodded once. Daniel closed the folder and slid it toward him. We don't need to confront him with this yet, he said. The strength of evidence is in sequence, not shock, agreed, William said. There was a knock at the door. Margaret Lewis stepped in, her expression composed. Mr. Carter, she said. Mr. Jackson is requesting to speak with you. William's gaze flicked briefly to Daniel. Daniel shook his head, almost imperceptibly. Not yet, William said. Elizabeth is still resting. Margaret nodded. Understood. When she left, Daniel leaned back slightly. He's starting to panic, he said. That's predictable. William's eyes returned to the timeline. Panic isn't accountability. No, Daniel agreed. But it creates mistakes. Down the hall, Ryan Jackson sat alone in the waiting area, his leg bouncing restlessly. His mother had stepped away to make calls, loud ones, her voice carrying down the corridor in clipped demands and half-formed threats. Ryan stared at his phone, scrolling through messages he had sent that morning. Apologies, explanations, attempts to minimize. None had been answered. He checked his email again and froze. A new message had arrived. Subject: confirmation of proxy activation from St. Mary's Medical Center. Legal administration. The language was formal, unyielding. He read it twice, then a third time, searching for loopholes. There were none. Inside the ICU, Elizabeth stirred again. Her eyes opened more fully this time. The room came into focus, slowly, white ceiling muted, beeping a nurse standing near the foot of the bed. Elizabeth, the nurse said gently. Can you hear me? Elizabeth's throat felt dry, her body heavy, but she nodded faintly. You've been very sick, the nurse continued. You're in the ICU. You're safe. Elizabeth swallowed with effort. Her voice came out as little more than air. Ryan, the nurse, paused. Not long, just enough. Your care is being managed, she said carefully. You're not alone. Elizabeth's eyes shifted toward the door. Moments later, William stepped back into the room. Elizabeth's gaze settled on him again. This time there was recognition not of his face, but of his presence. Of the way the room felt steadier when he was there. She frowned slightly. You came, she whispered. Yes, William said softly. I did. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. I listed you, she said, as if confessing something. On the form. I know, he replied. A faint exhale left her lips. Relief, not emotion, crossed her face. I didn't know if she began, then stopped exhaustion reclaiming her. You don't have to explain, William said. You never did. Outside, Daniel continued working. He coordinated with hospital administration to secure copies of all logs. He ensured the original video files were preserved. He placed holds on relevant financial records, not as punishment, but as precaution. Every step was procedural, defensible, quiet. By noon, a second folder had been assembled. This one contained Elizabeth's own records, her handwritten notes. Daniel had asked permission before reviewing them. Elizabeth had nodded once weakly, then gestured toward her bag. These aren't accusations, Daniel said as he skimmed them. They're observations. That's how she works, William replied. Dates, times, neutral language, no emotion, no interpretation. Daniel closed the notebook carefully. This corroborates everything he said, without saying a word. In the waiting area, Ryan finally saw his mother returning, her face tight. They're stonewalling, Linda said. No one will tell me anything. They can't do this, Ryan said. I'm her husband. Linda looked at him for a long moment. You were supposed to be, she said quietly. Ryan flinched. What does that mean? It means, Linda said, lowering her voice, that someone else showed up when you didn't. Ryan's phone buzzed again. Another email. This one from an unfamiliar address. Daniel Moore, Esquire. The message was brief. All communication regarding Elizabeth Jackson's care and related matters will proceed through counsel. Please refrain from direct contact until further notice. Ryan stared at the screen. Down the corridor, Elizabeth drifted back into sleep, her breathing steady, her body responding to care without argument. William remained seated nearby, patient, unintrusive. The paper trail was complete now. It did not accuse, It did not explain. It simply existed, solid, chronological, impossible to undo. And for the first time since Elizabeth Jackson had been brought into the ICU, the story of what happened to her was no longer vulnerable to being rewritten by whoever spoke the loudest. It belonged to the record. Elizabeth Jackson did not wake up ready to explain her life. When her eyes opened again later that afternoon, the room felt quieter, not because the machines had stopped, but because something else had settled. The frantic edge that had hovered over the night was gone. In its place was structure, order, the sense that decisions were being made without requiring her to defend herself. She noticed it before she understood it. The nurse adjusted her IV with practiced ease. A different doctor reviewed her chart unhurried. The questions were clear, respectful, directed at her when possible, deferred when not. No one raised their voice. No one asked her to justify anything. William Carter sat in the same chair as before, slightly to her right. He did not crowd her. He did not pretend familiarity they did not share openly. He was simply there, present in a way that did not demand acknowledgement. Elizabeth closed her eyes again, then opened them. "You didn't have to," she said hoarsely. William leaned forward just enough to hear her. "Yes," he replied. "I did." She turned her head slightly, looking at the ceiling. "I never wanted it to come out like this." "I know," he said. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The story between them had never been built on conversation. It was built on documents. Years earlier, when Elizabeth was still a teenager, the truth of her parentage had been sealed not out of shame, but necessity. A custody dispute that turned hostile. Legal threats that extended beyond family and into business. Advisors who insisted that distance was protection, not abandonment. William Carter had signed agreements that forbade contact beyond specific structured channels. He had complied, not because he wanted to disappear, but because the law required him to. Elizabeth had grown up knowing who he was without knowing him in the way movies promised fathers would be known. She received support without visits, protection without presence, options without explanation. It had never felt like a gift. It felt like a condition. When she turned 18, the terms shifted. The restrictions loosened, but by then, Elizabeth had learned independence as a survival skill. She did not run toward what had been withheld. She stepped carefully, choosing boundaries over resentment. William respected that. He did not push. He did not announce himself. He funded what he could anonymously. He ensured there was always a safety net she did not have to ask for. And when she filled out that medical form years later, sitting alone in a waiting room pen, hovering over the line marked secondary emergency contact, she wrote his name not as an emotional decision, but a practical one. He would answer. He would act. He would not disappear when it became inconvenient. That was all. Elizabeth inhaled slowly now, her chest tightening slightly before relaxing again. "They know," she asked, eyes still on the ceiling. William did not pretend not to understand. "The hospital administration does," he said. "Only what's necessary." She nodded faintly. "Ryan doesn't?" "Not yet." Her lips pressed together, not in fear, in consideration. "I didn't tell him," she said. "I didn't think it mattered." William chose his words carefully. "You were entitled to privacy." Elizabeth turned her head, meeting his eyes for the first time since waking. "It's going to change things." "Yes," he said, "but not because you did anything wrong." Down the hall, Daniel Moore continued his work. Part of it involved uncovering history not to sensationalize it, but to contextualize what had already happened. He requested sealed records through proper channels. He reviewed trust documents that had been established quietly years earlier, their activation clauses precise and unambiguous. One provision stood out. In the event that Elizabeth Jackson was incapacitated and abandoned by her legally designated proxy during a medical emergency, the trust's legal representatives were authorized to intervene immediately to protect her interests. Daniel leaned back in his chair after reading it. "This wasn't accidental," he said later to William. "She planned for failure." William did not smile. She planned for reality. In the waiting area, Ryan Jackson sat rigidly scrolling through his phone again and again, as if repetition might yield a different outcome. His mother sat beside him, now unusually quiet. "I don't understand," Ryan said for the third time. Why would she list him? Why would she hide this? Linda did not answer immediately. "You always thought you were the center of her life," she said finally. "Maybe you weren't." Ryan scoffed. "That's not fair." "No," Linda replied. "What's happening now is fair. What came before wasn't." Ryan stood abruptly. "I'm going to talk to her." Linda grabbed his arm. "You're not thinking straight." "I need answers," he snapped. "So does she," Linda said sharply. "And you weren't there." The words landed harder than anything administration had said. Back in the ICU, Elizabeth's eyes fluttered closed again as fatigue reclaimed her. The doctor adjusted her medication, satisfied with her progress. "She's stable enough to move out of ICU in the next 24 hours, if this holds," he said to William. "Thank you," William replied. The doctor hesitated. "There will be questions," he added. "From family, from her husband." William nodded. "When she's ready." Elizabeth slept through the afternoon, her body healing quietly, efficiently. Outside her room, systems aligned around her without requiring her voice. When she woke again, the light had changed. Evening approached, casting long shadows across the floor. Her throat felt stronger now. Her thoughts clearer. "Ryan will be angry," she said softly. "Yes," William agreed. "He'll say I lied. You didn't. He'll say I embarrassed him. That isn't your burden." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. "I never wanted to use any of this." "I know," William said. "That's why it's effective." She considered that, then nodded faintly. "Will this become public?" she asked. "Only if someone forces it to," he replied. "And even then, not in the way they expect." Elizabeth closed her eyes again, not from exhaustion this time, but from something closer to acceptance. For years, she had believed that keeping quiet was a form of self-protection. That revealing less meant losing less. Now lying there with machines still whispering around her, she understood something new. Silence was only powerful when it was chosen. What had happened to her in the ICU had stripped her of choice temporarily. And in that absence, the systems she had trusted stepped forward to speak for her. Not emotionally, not dramatically, legally. Outside the hospital, the city continued its rhythm indifferent to personal reckonings. Inside, Elizabeth Jackson rested, surrounded not by noise or confrontation, but by the quiet consequences of decisions made long before the night she nearly died. And while Ryan waited for a chance to rewrite the story, the truth of it had already been secured, sealed, not by anger or revenge, but by preparation. The legal process did not arrive with drama. It arrived with emails. By the following morning, Elizabeth Jackson's case had moved from crisis management to procedural review. The transition was subtle, but unmistakable. Where there had been urgency, there was now structure. Where there had been unanswered calls, there were scheduled meetings. Elizabeth remained in a monitored recovery room, no longer ICU, but not yet free of observation. Her body was doing what it needed to do: rest, recalibrate, recover, while the systems around her prepared for the next phase. Daniel Moore stood at the nurse's station, reviewing the final overnight logs. He checked each entry against the digital timestamps, verifying that nothing had been overwritten or amended. "Everything's intact," the charge nurse said. "Nothing unusual." "That's exactly what we want," Daniel replied. At 9:12 a.m., the hospital generated a formal internal report, unresponsive primary medical proxy during critical event. It was not an accusation. It was a classification. The report listed facts only: number of contact attempts, duration of non-response, confirmation of message receipt, activation of secondary proxy. The language was neutral, almost clinical. It did not mention parties. It did not mention intent. It did not speculate. It did not need to. In a small conference room 2 floors below Elizabeth's recovery rooms, Daniel met with Margaret Lewis and the hospital's risk management officer. A binder lay open between them. "This is where things tend to go wrong," Margaret said, tapping the table lightly. "When emotions get involved." "They won't," Daniel replied. "Not if we keep this procedural." The risk officer nodded. "Mr. Jackson has already requested access to the report," and Daniel asked. "We'll provide a redacted version," Margaret said. "Standard policy." Daniel made a note. "Good." Across the hospital, Ryan Jackson sat with his phone in his hand, staring at the same email he had read half a dozen times already. It informed him that a review was underway and that communication regarding Elizabeth's care would proceed through counsel. He forwarded it to his attorney with a single line. "Call me now." When the call came, Ryan answered immediately. "This is a mess," he said without preamble. "They shut me out of my own wife's care." The attorney listened, then asked a single question. "Were you reachable?" Ryan hesitated. "I didn't think." "That's not an answer," the attorney said. "I was out," Ryan admitted. "But it wasn't intentional. Intent doesn't matter here," the attorney replied. "Documentation does." Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. "So what do we do?" The attorney exhaled slowly. "First, we get the records. Then we stop talking." At 10:26 a.m., Daniel received confirmation that Ryan had retained counsel. He was not surprised. "That was fast," Margaret said. "It always is," Daniel replied. "Fear accelerates paperwork." Elizabeth woke shortly before noon, clearer than she had been since arriving at the hospital. The fog in her mind had thinned. She could track time now. She could follow conversations without drifting. William sat beside her again, reading through a document on his tablet. "Are they starting something?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "They're reviewing what happened," William replied. "That's all?" She nodded once. "That's fine." He looked at her, then really looked. "You don't have to engage," he said. "Not yet." "I know," she replied, "but I want to understand." William hesitated, then handed her the tablet. "This is the hospital report," he said. "Redacted. Facts only." Elizabeth read slowly. She did not flinch at the timeline. She had expected it. What surprised her was how clean it looked, how little interpretation there was. "It reads like a ledger," she said. "That's intentional," William replied. "Ledgers don't argue." She scrolled to the end and handed the tablet back. "Ryan won't like this." "No," William agreed. But liking it was never the requirement. That afternoon, Daniel met with Elizabeth for the first time since the escalation began. He sat across from her legal pad in hand posture, relaxed. "I won't ask you to relive anything," he said. "I just need to confirm facts." Elizabeth nodded. "That's fine. Did your husband leave the hospital before your condition stabilized?" "Yes." "Did he inform medical staff where he was going?" "No." "Did he respond to any attempts to contact him?" Elizabeth paused. "Not that I know of." Daniel wrote each answer down without commentary. "Did you designate a secondary medical proxy?" "Yes." "Was that designation made freely and without coercion?" "Yes." "Do you wish to maintain that designation at this time?" Elizabeth met his eyes. "Yes." Daniel closed the pad. "That's all I need for now." Outside the room, Ryan's attorney arrived at the hospital. He spoke briefly with administration, then requested a meeting with Daniel. They met in the same neutral conference room as before. "I want to resolve this quietly," Ryan's attorney said. Daniel did not smile. "So do we." "Then we need to establish intent," the attorney continued. There was no abandonment. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "We don't need to establish intent," he said. "We establish sequence." The attorney frowned. "Sequence doesn't tell the whole story. It tells the only story that matters in procedure," Daniel replied. "What happened when and who was available." There was a pause. "Are you pursuing action?" the attorney asked. Daniel folded his hands. "Not at this stage." "Then what is this A review?" Daniel said. "One your client initiated by not answering the phone." Silence stretched between them. By evening, the hospital had completed its internal assessment. No violations, no deviations. The decision to activate the secondary proxy had been appropriate, documented, and lawful. Elizabeth was informed quietly. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," William confirmed. She leaned back against her pillows, absorbing the simplicity of it. No courtroom, no raised voices, no spectacle, just process. Ryan received the summary shortly after. He read it alone in his apartment, the quiet pressing in around him. The document did not accuse him of malice. It did not label him cruel. It simply described what he had done and what he had not done. And for the first time since the night Elizabeth was admitted, Ryan understood something he had never considered before. Silence was not neutral. It had weight. It had consequence. And it could be measured. Elizabeth closed her eyes that night with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. The worst had passed not because someone had shouted louder than Ryan, but because the truth had been allowed to exist without interference. The legal review had not punished him. It had simply recorded him. And that Elizabeth knew was often enough. Ryan Jackson made his first mistake the morning after the review closed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't reckless. It was the kind of mistake men made when they believed the worst had already passed. He sent an email. Not to the hospital, not to his attorney, to William Carter. The message was carefully worded, stripped of accusation, padded with humility he did not quite feel. Mr. Carter, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I was unavailable briefly, not negligent. I care deeply about my wife, and I would appreciate the opportunity to speak privately and resolve this without further escalation. He read it twice, before sending satisfied that it sounded reasonable. Balanced. Adult. What he did not realize was that the email contradicted 3 statements he had already made, 2 to hospital staff, 1 to his own attorney. Daniel Moore received a copy within minutes. He did not forward it immediately. He placed it in the growing folder labeled Correspondence Post-Event and compared it to the timeline already established. Ryan's earlier claims were simple. He did not receive the calls. He did not realize the situation was urgent. He believed Elizabeth was stable. The email told a different story. Unavailable briefly. That phrase alone implied awareness. Awareness of contact attempts. Awareness of urgency. Awareness of choice. Daniel leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "He's reframing," he said later to William. "That's always when the cracks show." William did not ask what to do next. He trusted Daniel to let the evidence speak in its own time. Elizabeth was awake when Daniel came to see her again that afternoon. She was stronger now, able to sit upright, able to focus without drifting. "I'm not here to question you," Daniel said. "I just need you to hear something." He played an audio file. Ryan's voice filled the room, recorded from a voicemail he had left the night before after receiving notice of the proxy activation. "I don't understand why you're making this so dramatic," Ryan said in the recording. "I stepped out for a bit. You know how she is. She always makes things bigger than they are." Elizabeth closed her eyes as the audio ended. Daniel waited. "That was sent after he knew you were critical," Daniel said gently, "and after he knew authority had shifted." Elizabeth did not cry. She did not react outwardly at all. "I need that noted," she said quietly. "It already is," Daniel replied. "But we'll add your acknowledgement." She nodded. "Thank you." When Daniel left, William remained behind. "You don't have to listen to any more of that," he said. "I know," Elizabeth replied. "But I needed to hear it once, so I wouldn't doubt myself later." That was the pattern with her. She did not collect proof to punish. She collected it to prevent erasure. Ryan made his second mistake that evening. He called Elizabeth directly. The call went through once, ringing long enough for hope to rise before being redirected to voicemail. He left a message. "Elizabeth," he said, voice strained, but controlled. "I don't know what's happening, but this has gone too far. We need to talk. You don't have to do this." The phrase lingered. "You don't have to do this." Elizabeth listened to the voicemail hours later, sitting alone in her recovery room as dusk faded into night. She replayed it once. Then she deleted it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The following morning, Daniel met again with Ryan's attorney. "I I want to make something clear, the attorney said. My client does not dispute the timeline. He disputes the interpretation. Daniel nodded. We're not offering interpretation. Then what are you offering containment, Daniel said. If your client stops creating new records. The attorney frowned. What do you mean? Daniel slid a printout across the table. Ryan's email, the voicemail. A screenshot of a text message sent to Elizabeth's phone and marked unread. These, Daniel said, are unforced errors. The attorney read silently, his jaw tightening. He's trying to explain himself, the attorney said. Daniel met his gaze. Explanation is a narrative act, he replied. Records don't require it. By midday, Ryan was advised firmly to stop communicating altogether. He did not listen. He went to the hospital. This time, he did not shout. He did not demand. He waited. When Elizabeth was informed he was there, she did not react immediately. Do I have to see him? She asked William. No, he said. You decide. She thought for a long moment. Yes, she said finally, but not alone. The meeting was brief. Ryan sat across from her in a small consultation room. His posture stiff, his eyes scanning her face as if looking for familiarity that no longer presented itself. You look better, he said. Elizabeth nodded once. I never meant to leave you like that, he continued. I didn't think it was stop, Elizabeth said softly. The word landed harder than shouting ever could. I'm not here to hear what you meant, she continued. I'm here to tell you what happened. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. You left, she said. The hospital called. You didn't answer. That's not interpretation. That's sequence. I was gone for a few hours, he protested. That shouldn't. It did, she replied, because I needed you. Silence stretched between them. You didn't even ask how I was, she added. Ryan looked down. I thought I know what you thought, Elizabeth said. You thought I'd wait. The meeting ended without resolution. Ryan left frustrated, confused, and more exposed than before. Elizabeth returned to her room and asked Daniel to add one more note to the record. Direct communication occurred. No reconciliation requested. Boundaries affirmed. That afternoon, Daniel compiled everything. The emails, the bank records, the videos, the voicemails, Elizabeth's notes, the hospital logs. He did not label the file evidence. He labeled it chronology, because that was all it was. When William reviewed it later, he did not comment. This will stand, he said simply. Yes, Daniel replied, and it will not change. Elizabeth slept that night with the window cracked open, the city air drifting in softly. For the first time since her marriage began to fracture, she did not feel the need to rehearse conversations in her mind. There was nothing left to explain. Ryan's words had already done the work for her, and the truth, quiet, patient, immovable, had finished assembling itself without ever needing her to raise her voice. The Jackson family arrived the way they always had together, loudly, and certain they belonged wherever they stood. It was just after noon, when Linda Jackson stepped through the hospital's main entrance, flanked by two relatives Elizabeth recognized only vaguely from holidays she had learned to endure. They moved with purpose, not urgency, as if confidence itself were a credential. Ryan followed, a step behind, jaw-tight, shoulders squared. He had not slept. It showed in the way his eyes kept darting toward signs, toward elevators, toward anyone who looked like they might stop him. At the front desk, Linda did not wait to be addressed. We're here to see Elizabeth Jackson, she said, voice firm. Family. The receptionist glanced at the screen. Please wait, she said. Linda's lips thinned. We've already waited long enough. The security officer nearby shifted, slightly alert but unobtrusive. Hospital protocol was clear when tension rose. Presence, not confrontation, was the first response. Minutes later, Margaret Lewis appeared. Mrs. Jackson, she said calmly. Mr. Jackson, thank you for coming. We're here to see her, Linda said again. Immediately. Margaret nodded. Visitation is currently limited. And on whose authority? Linda demanded. Elizabeth's, Margaret replied. The answer landed unexpectedly. Ryan stepped forward. She didn't say that. Margaret met his gaze. She did. Silence followed. Not because anyone was satisfied, but but because the statement could not be argued without exposing more than Ryan was ready to reveal. Linda scoffed. "This is absurd," she said. "She's confused. She's been through a medical event. She doesn't know what she's doing." Margaret's voice remained even. "Elizabeth is alert-oriented and fully capable of making decisions regarding her care and visitors. She's being manipulated." Linda snapped. "By that man." Margaret did not respond to the accusation. She gestured toward a nearby consultation room. "If you'd like to speak, we can do so privately." Linda hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Fine." Inside the room, the temperature felt colder, not physically, but socially. Ryan sat arms crossed, staring at the table. Linda remained standing. "You have to understand," Linda said, turning to Margaret. "Ryan has been under a lot of stress. Elizabeth is sensitive. She takes things personally." Margaret listened without interruption. "This is a family matter," Linda continued. "It doesn't need lawyers. It doesn't need outsiders." Margaret folded her hands. "The hospital does not determine family dynamics," she said. "We follow patient directives." Linda laughed sharply. "You really expect me to believe Elizabeth asked for all of this?" "Yes," Margaret replied. Ryan looked up. "She's doing this to punish me." Margaret's expression did not change. "The hospital does not interpret motivation." Linda leaned forward. "Then let us see her," she said. "Let her tell us herself." Margaret paused, not because she was unsure, but because the next step required consent. "I'll ask," she said. When Margaret returned to Elizabeth's room, she explained the situation quietly. Elizabeth listened, her face calm, her hands folded loosely in her lap. "They're here," Margaret said. "They're asking to see you." Elizabeth nodded once. "I know. Do you want that?" Elizabeth considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said, "but with conditions." Margaret waited. "I'll see Ryan," Elizabeth continued. "Not his mother, not the others. And it will be brief." Margaret nodded. "Understood." When Ryan entered the room, he looked as if he were stepping into unfamiliar territory. Elizabeth sat upright against the pillows, color returned to her face, eyes clear. "You look," he began. "Sit," Elizabeth said quietly. He did. For a moment, neither spoke. "Your mother is in the waiting area," Ryan said. "She's upset." Elizabeth met his gaze. "I didn't invite her. She's worried." Elizabeth nodded. So was the hospital. Ryan frowned. "Why are you doing this?" Elizabeth did not answer immediately. She reached toward the bedside table and picked up her notebook. It was the same one she had carried for years, edges worn, pages filled with careful handwriting. She did not open it. "I'm not doing anything," she said. "I'm allowing what already happened to be acknowledged." Ryan shook his head. This didn't have to become a spectacle. Elizabeth's voice remained steady. "I didn't make it one. You let them shut me out." "They followed procedure," Elizabeth replied. "The same procedure I trusted when I listed a secondary contact?" Ryan stiffened. "You never told me about that." "I didn't need permission," she said. The truth sat between them heavy and unmoving. "You embarrassed me," Ryan said finally. Elizabeth studied his face for a long moment. "I almost died," she said. "And you're talking about embarrassment." Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. "This conversation is over," Elizabeth continued. "I need rest." Ryan stood slowly. "This isn't finished." Elizabeth met his eyes. "It is for me." When he left the room, Linda was waiting. "Well," she demanded. Ryan did not answer. Linda pushed past him toward the door, but it did not open. A security officer stood calmly in her way. "Ma'am," he said, "visitation is concluded." "This is outrageous," Linda said, her voice rising. "She's being poisoned against her own family." Elizabeth could hear the raised voices from her room. She closed her eyes. Minutes later, Margaret returned. "They've been escorted out," she said quietly. "There was some resistance." Elizabeth nodded. "Thank you." Outside the hospital, Linda continued to speak loudly, her words carrying across the sidewalk. Accusations, insults, Claims of betrayal. A passerby slowed. Someone else raised a phone. Inside the hospital, cameras captured the scene, not for drama, but for record. Back in her room, Elizabeth rested, the noise fading quickly as the doors closed again. William Carter arrived shortly after. "They were here," he said, not as a question. "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "And I said what I needed to." He nodded. "That's enough." Later that evening, Daniel Moore added one final note to the file. Attempted family intervention occurred. Patient boundaries stated clearly. Hospital protocol followed. No further action required. Elizabeth slept deeply that night. For the first time since her marriage began to unravel, she had spoken plainly, and nothing terrible had happened. No shouting, no retaliation, no collapse, just consequence. Outside, Ryan sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, replaying the scene in his mind. He could not decide which unsettled him more, the calm in Elizabeth's voice, or the fact that no one had stepped in to defend him. Because for once, the room had not bent toward the loudest person in it. It had aligned itself with the truth. The settlement offer arrived without apology. It came through counsel drafted in careful language, meant to sound conciliatory without admitting fault. The subject line was neutral, professional, almost polite. Proposed resolution, Jackson v. Jackson. Preliminary discussion. Daniel Moore read it once, then a second time, his expression unchanged. He did not forward it immediately. He placed it beside the growing file on his desk and waited until the afternoon light shifted across the window before bringing it to Elizabeth. She was sitting up when he arrived. A blanket folded neatly across her lap, a cup of untouched tea cooling on the table beside her. She looked stronger now, not just physically, but in the way she held her shoulders, the way her gaze did not flicker when difficult conversations approached. "They want to talk," Daniel said. Elizabeth nodded. "I assumed they would." He handed her the document. She read slowly, carefully, the way she always did. The offer was framed as generosity. Ryan proposed an expedited separation. No public filings, no hearings. A lump sum drawn from joint assets. A non-disclosure agreement binding both parties. Mutual non-disparagement. In exchange, Elizabeth would agree not to pursue any claims related to the hospital incident. No further review. No escalation. She finished reading and placed the document on the table. "They want silence," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "packaged as peace." Elizabeth considered that for a long moment. "They're afraid," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Fear accelerates offers." William Carter, who had been standing near the window, turned. "And mistakes." Elizabeth looked up at him. "What happens if I refuse?" Daniel answered. "Nothing changes. We continue as we are." "And if I accept?" Daniel hesitated. "You would gain finality, but at a cost." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "The record would stop, yes." She leaned back against the pillows, eyes drifting briefly to the ceiling. "I don't want money for this," she said. "I want it acknowledged." William did not interrupt. Daniel chose his words carefully. "Acceptance would not erase what already exists," he said. "But it would limit how far it goes." Elizabeth closed her eyes, then opened them again. "Then I don't accept." Daniel did not look surprised. "I'll respond accordingly." Later that afternoon, Ryan received the rejection. He read it standing in his kitchen phone pressed to his ear as his attorney explained the implications. "She won't settle," the attorney said. "Not on these terms." Ryan exhaled sharply. "Then what does she want?" "She wants the record to stand." Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." The attorney paused. "Fairness isn't the metric here. Exposure is." Ryan sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "So what happens now? We proceed carefully," the attorney said. "And you stop creating new material, but the consequences were already unfolding." That evening, Ryan attempted to access the joint account to cover a routine expense. The transaction failed. He tried again. Denied. A notification appeared shortly after. Temporary hold account under review. His pulse spiked. He called his bank immediately. "This is Ryan Jackson," he said. "There's an issue with my account." "Yes, Mr. Jackson," the representative replied. "Your account is currently under administrative review." "Why?" Ryan demanded. "I'm not authorized to discuss details," she said. "You'll receive documentation shortly." When the email arrived, it explained the hold in neutral language. No accusations, no blame. A review had been triggered due to flagged activity during a medical emergency involving a co-account holder. The bank required clarification before releasing funds. Ryan stared at the screen. "They froze it," he muttered. At the hospital, Daniel received confirmation of the hold and logged it without comment. "That was automatic," he told Elizabeth. "Not punitive." She nodded. "I know." The following morning, Elizabeth signed the separation paperwork. There was no ceremony, no dramatic pause. Daniel laid the documents out neatly. She reviewed each page. She signed where indicated. "Do you want to take a break?" he asked at one point. "No," she replied. "I'm fine." When she finished, Daniel gathered the papers and placed them into the file. "That's it," he said. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. "Good." Outside the hospital, Ryan met with his attorney again. "This is getting worse," Ryan said. "My accounts are under review. My mother won't stop calling. People are asking questions." The attorney leaned back. "Then you should have stopped earlier." Ryan looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the attorney said evenly that you assumed silence would protect you." "It doesn't. It documents you." Ryan scoffed. "She's turning everyone against me." "No," the attorney replied. "She's letting systems do what they do." Ryan stood and began pacing. "I didn't do anything illegal." "Maybe not," the attorney said. "But legality isn't the only exposure here. Reputation is." That word lingered. At the hospital, Elizabeth prepared for discharge. Her doctors were satisfied with her progress. Instructions were reviewed. Follow-up appointments scheduled. She packed slowly, folding her clothes with care. The notebook went into her bag last. William stood nearby, silent, as always. "Do you want to go somewhere else?" he asked. "After you leave here." Elizabeth considered it. "Not yet," she said. "I want to go home, just not with him." William nodded. "Arrangements have been made." When Elizabeth stepped out of the hospital that afternoon, the air felt different, lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because she no longer felt suspended. Ryan did not come. He learned of her discharge through counsel. Another document, another timestamp. That evening, Daniel finalized the response to the settlement proposal. No agreement reached, proceeding per standard process. Nothing more, nothing less. Elizabeth sat alone in the quiet apartment she had once shared, now cleared of his things. The space felt unfamiliar, but not empty. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Ryan. Unsent. Blocked by instruction. She placed the phone face down and opened her notebook instead. She did not write about him. She wrote about what came next. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like something she had to brace for. It felt like something she could enter without apology. And somewhere else in the city, Ryan stared at his reflection in a darkened window, trying to understand how control had slipped away without a single argument being won or lost. Because the truth had never raised its voice. It had simply refused to move. The final review did not take place in a courtroom. There were no raised benches, no gavels, no spectators whispering from the back row. Instead, it unfolded in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of Carter Global Holdings' neutral ground, chosen not for intimidation, but for clarity. The table was long and bare. Water pitchers sat untouched. A single screen waited at one end of the room, dark for now. Elizabeth Jackson arrived quietly, accompanied by Daniel Moore. She wore a simple coat over a soft blouse, her movements unhurried, deliberate. The physical traces of her hospital stay were no longer visible, but the stillness she carried remained a calm that did not ask for permission. William Carter stood when she entered. He did not pull out her chair. He did not guide her. He acknowledged her with a nod, nothing more. This was her space now. Across the table, Ryan Jackson sat with his attorney. His posture was rigid, jaw-clenched eyes flicking briefly to Elizabeth before returning to the tabletop. He had not spoken to her since the hospital. He would not speak to her now unless required. The review began without ceremony. Daniel connected his tablet to the screen. "This is not a trial," he said evenly. "This is a procedural record review requested by multiple parties. We will present documentation. No commentary unless clarification is required." No one objected. The screen lit up. The first slide displayed the timeline clean, unembellished. ICU admission, unanswered calls, read receipts, proxy activation. Each entry appeared one by one, dated and time-stamped. No adjectives, no conclusions. Ryan shifted in his seat. Daniel moved on. Bank records appeared next. Charges highlighted only by their timestamps. The amounts were not emphasized. The timing was. This account activity occurred during the same window as the documented non-response, Daniel said. That is the only relevance. Ryan's attorney cleared his throat. "My client does not dispute the activity. He disputes the implication." Daniel nodded. "We are not offering implication." The screen changed. Video stills appeared, frames captured from public stories. Ryan mid-laugh, a raised glass. Music lights reflected in his eyes. These were publicly posted, Daniel said. Archived independently. Ryan's attorney leaned forward. "We object to characterization. There is none." Daniel interrupted calmly. "Only sequence." The room fell silent. Next came hospital logs. Pages scrolled slowly, each line bearing the weight of neutrality. Attempted contact. No response. Escalation initiated. Secondary proxy confirmed. Elizabeth watched without reaction. She had already seen all of this. What mattered now was not the content, but the fact that it was being acknowledged in a space Ryan could not control. Daniel turned off the screen. "That concludes the record," he said. "We are not asking for judgment. We are asking for recognition that procedure was followed and that no corrective action is required." Ryan's attorney spoke after a pause. "My client maintains there was no intent to abandon." Daniel folded his hands. Intent was not part of the review. William finally spoke. "What is being examined here," he said calmly, "is not character. It is conduct." Ryan looked up sharply. "You don't get to." William raised a hand, not in command, but in boundary. "I'm not speaking to you," he said. "I'm speaking to the process." The words landed cleanly. Elizabeth remained silent. That silence was no longer absence. It was presence refined. After a brief recess, the findings were summarized. No hospital violations, no procedural errors, no grounds for reversal of proxy activation. The conclusion was delivered without flourish. "This review is closed," Daniel said. Ryan sat back slowly, the tension in his shoulders giving way to something heavier finality. Elizabeth stood. She did not look at Ryan. "I have one condition," she said. The room stilled. Daniel turned to her. "Of course." "I want no further mediation meetings," Elizabeth continued. "No forced conversations. Any future communication goes through counsel only." Ryan's attorney nodded. "That's acceptable." Ryan said nothing. Elizabeth gathered her coat and turned toward the door. William walked beside her as they exited the room. He did not ask how she felt. He did not need to. In the elevator, Elizabeth stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looked like herself again. Not the woman in the ICU, not the woman being spoken over in hallways. Just herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, not turning. William nodded. "You didn't need saving," he replied. "You needed space." Outside, the city moved as it always had. Cars passed, people hurried. Nothing marked the moment as significant. That was how Elizabeth wanted it. Ryan remained seated long after the room emptied. His attorney spoke softly. "We're done here." Ryan nodded once. As he stood, he realized something he had not prepared for. There was nothing left to argue against. No accusation to defend. No insult to rebut. No enemy to blame. Only a record that would follow him quietly, persistently into rooms where charm and confidence once worked. Elizabeth stepped out onto the sidewalk, the winter air crisp against her skin. She did not feel victorious. She felt finished, and that she knew was the most honest ending she could have asked for. Elizabeth Jackson did not rush the ending. In the weeks after the review closed, her life settled into something quieter than before. Not calmer quiet had always been her element, but steadier, less reactive. The kind of quiet that came from not waiting for someone else to decide how the story would be told. She returned to the apartment only once. The space no longer felt like home. It felt like evidence of a chapter that had run its course. Ryan's belongings were already gone, removed efficiently without confrontation. Elizabeth moved through the room slowly, touching nothing she didn't need to. The walls held no echoes she wanted to keep. She packed what remained hers into 2 suitcases. The notebook went into her bag last. Outside, a car waited. William had arranged it without comment, without expectation. When Elizabeth stepped into the cold air and closed the door behind her, she did not look back. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city sliding past the window in familiar shapes. Elizabeth watched people on sidewalks, faces set with their own concerns, their own private reckonings. "I don't want a new place yet," she said eventually. William glanced at her. "You don't have to decide anything." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm saying it." He nodded, accepting the boundary. They stopped at a small, furnished apartment, temporary, neutral, intentionally unremarkable. A place meant for transition, not identity. Elizabeth thanked the driver and stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. For the first time in years, no one else had a key. The legal separation finalized quietly. Documents were filed. Accounts were divided cleanly. There were no dramatic hearings, no public statements. Ryan complied, not out of understanding, but exhaustion. The system did not require him to agree, only to follow procedure. Elizabeth did not attend the final filing. Daniel called her afterward. "It's done," he said. "Thank you," she replied. "That's all?" "Yes," Elizabeth said. "That's all." When she hung up, she stood by the window and let the moment pass without trying to define it. Across town, Ryan Jackson sat alone in an office that no longer felt like proof of success. He had lost nothing dramatic, no job, no freedom, no fortune. What he had lost was subtler: access, credibility, the benefit of being believed by default. People still spoke to him, they still smiled, but something in their tone had shifted. Questions lingered where assumptions once lived. The record followed him, not loudly, not publicly, but persistently. It did not accuse, it did not shame, it simply existed. Elizabeth did not track what happened to him after that. She did not need to. Her life was no longer organized around his reactions. She focused instead on rebuilding in ways that felt honest. She returned to work part-time, choosing projects that required attention rather than performance. She spent mornings walking through quiet neighborhoods, relearning the shape of her own days. She wrote in her notebook not to document harm, but to sketch ideas, observations, plans. The entries changed. Morning light through the kitchen window. Coffee without interruption. Silence that feels earned. William visited occasionally, never unannounced, never intrusive. One afternoon, they sat across from each other at a small table, sunlight pooling between them. "You don't owe me anything," he said, as if clarifying something long unspoken. "I know," Elizabeth replied. "I mean it," he added. She met his gaze. "So do I." Their relationship remained what it had always been: careful, deliberate, shaped by choice rather than obligation. There were no attempts to reclaim lost time. No speeches about what could have been. That too felt like respect. Months passed. Elizabeth filed the final document herself one morning, standing at a counter in a government office that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The clerk stamped it, slid it back across the desk, and said, "You're all set." Elizabeth nodded and walked out. Outside, the sky was overcast, ordinary, perfect. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel broken. She felt complete. That night, she opened her notebook and wrote one final entry about the past, not as evidence, but as closure. Silence didn't save me. Preparation did. Truth didn't need my voice to be heard. It only needed space. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf. There were no more notes to take. Elizabeth Jackson had not won anything. She had simply refused to lose herself in a story that required her to stay quiet forever. When she walked forward now, she did so without needing to explain where she'd been or why she left. The ending did not belong to the loudest person in the room. It belonged to the one who stayed long enough to see the truth stand on its own. Sometimes the most powerful turning points in life arrive without noise. Elizabeth Jackson's story reminds us that strength is not always loud, and justice does not always announce itself. For a long time, she was mistaken for someone passive, simply because she did not argue, did not explain herself, did not fight every small injustice with words. But what looked like silence was in truth preparation. While others relied on charm, excuses, or volume, she relied on records consistency and the quiet discipline of paying attention. One of the hardest lessons in adulthood is realizing that love without responsibility is not love at all. When accountability disappears, affection becomes conditional and presence becomes optional. Elizabeth learned this not through betrayal alone, but through absence. The kind of absence that shows up when it matters most. And instead of begging to be chosen, she chose something far more difficult: to let the truth stand on its own. This story is not about revenge. No one is publicly humiliated. No dramatic victory speech is delivered. What unfolds instead is something rarer and more enduring: dignity. Elizabeth does not raise her voice to be heard. She creates boundaries and steps back, allowing systems, procedures, and facts to speak where emotions would only blur the truth. In doing so, she proves that you do not need to destroy someone to free yourself. You only need to stop protecting their lies. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is this: silence is not weakness when it is chosen. Silence becomes power when it is paired with clarity, preparation, and self-respect. Life will test us in moments where we are least able to defend ourselves. What carries us through those moments is not how convincingly we argue, but how well we have prepared to be protected, even when we cannot speak. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when you had to stay quiet, let go, or trust the truth to unfold in its own time, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments how this story made you feel, or what part stayed with you the longest. And if you believe that quiet strength, emotional realism, and stories of earned justice deserve a place in your life, consider subscribing to the channel. These stories aren't meant to shout. They're meant to stay with you.